Good morning, everyone. Today, we're going to take the first few minutes of this morning to look at backward design model. So this is something we want to implement on our campus this year across every subject. So we're going to look at what is backwards design. We'll look at the steps in the process individually, and then we'll look at putting that into practice and an example of a lesson that was built using the backward design model, and we'll do a bit of a think aloud as we go through that. Okay, so let's go ahead and look at what is backward design. So, backward design model. So this was first introduced by Grant Wiggins and Jay Matee. Backwards design is really just a model where we start with the end in mind. So we come up with our goals first. What do we want our children to be able to do? What are our desired results for them? Then we come up with the assessment piece. How are we going to know that they reached those goals? And then finally, we build the activities that are going to help our students reach those goals. So you see how our stages build onto one another. So in just a moment, we're going to look at each of these stages individually and look and give you some guiding questions to help you as you're planning in each of these stages. So stage one is our goals and objectives. So as we said, backwards design, we're doing it backwards from the original. So in a just standard design process, right, we usually think of our lessons that we want to teach, the activities we're going to do, and all those things. And then from that is where we create our assessment. So this design, right, works backwards. So we actually start with what is our end goal, which isn't so unusual. That's kind of is done at the beginning in any design model. So we have some guiding questions for us here. What do we want our students to be familiar with? What do they need to know and be able to do? And then what enduring understanding do we want them to take away? So we can think of these as growing on each other too. So the things we want them to be familiar with are kind of like the big idea. What do we want them to know and do narrows more. And then the enduring understanding, what do we want them to take with them when they leave our classroom, when they go on to whatever the next grade level, whatever the next stage is for them. So that's really where we get very specific. Okay, let's go ahead and take a look at stage two. So stage two is that assessment piece. So again, unlike your traditional planning model, we are not doing this last. Instead, we're doing it in the middle. We are going to take our goals and figure out what type of assessment can we give our students to tell that they have reached those goals and objectives. So we can ask ourselves a couple guiding questions here too. How do we know if our students have achieved their desired results? And then we want to ask ourselves, what will we accept as evidence of our students' understanding and proficiency? So this again is where we really distinguish ourselves from that traditional model. So before we even think about the activities we're going to do, those favorite lessons we like to teach, we're going to think about how are we going to assess the knowledge and skills of our students. Okay, but once we've decided that, that's when we move into looking at those activities. Now that we know what we want them to be able to accomplish, and we know how that aligns to our goals, now we can look at the specifics of how they're going to get there. So activities. Finally, we plan what we as teachers will do to ensure students have the knowledge and skills to be successful on their assessment and that they reach those goals and objectives we set up for them. So here are just some examples of some activities that you could use when you are planning. All right, so we're going to put this process in action. So for this example, we're going to be using TEKS from the 8th grade English Language Arts. So the TEK we're going to be used is from the Author's Purpose and Craft strand, speaking, listening, reading, writing, thinking, and using multiple texts. So the student uses critical inquiry to analyze the author's choice and how they influence and communicate meaning within a variety of texts. The student analyzes and applies author's craft purposely in order to develop his or her own product and performances. The student is expected to, and so we're going to use E They identify and the use of literary devices, including omniscient and limited point of view to achieve a specific person. So we are looking at the point of view TEK. All right, so let's look at our goals. So goals for stage 1. So we're going to ask ourselves those guiding questions. So what ideas do we want our students to be familiar with? So thematically, our lessons are for this unit are linked through this idea of suspense. So that is the idea we want our students to be familiar with. What is suspense and how does an author create suspenseful writing, right? That is the big level. Okay, so now we're going to narrow down to that middle level. What specifically do they need to know and what do they need to do to be successful on the assessment that we're going to give them? So they need to analyze different forms of point of view, including limited versus omniscient, subjective versus objective. Okay, so that's pretty clearly taken from the TEK, right? So this is really where we get pretty TEK specific sometimes. And then we have that enduring understanding. What do we want them to take away with them and remember on into the future? So we want them to remember that point of view is an important storytelling device that determines what the reader knows and influences how they feel, right? Because the important part of this TEK for 8th grade really is what is the use, right? What is that specific use? What does it do for the writing? Okay, so stage 2, the assessment. So how do we know if students have achieved the desired results? So students will be able to identify different types of point of view. Okay, so we're starting at the bottom of Bloom's, right? We're just identifying. And then our second goal brings this up a little bit. So students will be able to analyze works of literature to determine point of view and, one more step, evaluate the effect it has on the reader. So we want to make sure that we also have that built into there. We want to make sure that sometimes we want to use those bottom levels, but we don't want to just have that bottom Bloom's level. We want to make sure that we are pushing farther up, especially in 8th grade, into that abstract thinking, because we're getting to that point in their brain development where that's really where the exercise needs to happen. So then what will I accept as evidence of student understanding and proficiency? So our assessment piece for this unit, it's a unit. Students will write a suspenseful short story, and they are going to use shifting point of view halfway through. Now, actually, there's a little bit more to this assessment, but for the point of this lesson, this is where we see the connection to this TEK and this specific lesson. The unit as a whole, like I said, is thematically linked, and then in the unit we link in all of these, or in the unit performance task, we link in all of the TEKs that were learned throughout the unit. So as you can see, if you were to look at the full thing, you would see backwards design not just in this one lesson, but actually throughout the unit. So our assessment for this is we're going to be writing a suspenseful short story, and then the point of view will shift halfway through. But then one step further, students will then evaluate their classmates' writing to determine what types of point of view are used and what effort it has on them as the reader. So if you think about our goals from before, so let's just flip back there real fast. So what is suspense and how does the author create suspenseful writing? So we have our suspense piece here, right? What do students need to know and do? So they need to analyze different forms of point of view. So we are analyzing different forms of point of view, especially in that second piece where they're evaluating their classmates. And then the enduring understanding piece, understanding that how it's important for the reader and how it influences how they feel. And that is where the effect it has on them as the reader comes in. So you can see that connection. I really made sure that we built from those goals into this assessment piece. And then finally, we have the activities we're going to use to teach what needs to be taught in order for them to be successful on the assessment and achieve our goals and objectives. So we are going to introduce suspense using our hanging hashtags. So what that means is we'll put up a picture that has like a very ominous mood to it, and the kids will write their thoughts on our little hashtag papers, their little cutouts, and they will go and put them up on the board. And then we'll use that to segue into point of view. So we'll take that ominous picture and then we'll show that same image, but from other points of view, and describe how that changes the way it affects us. So then we move into our mini lesson. We'll do some focus notes, taking notes over different types of point of view. So we'll get into the terminology with the limited versus omniscient, subjective versus objective. And we'll do some questioning and some think, pair, share as we do these focus notes so that we are using, right, using the terms and the learning as we go through. So finally, we're going to read The Monkey's Paw, and we're going to use a graphic organizer to describe when we see the shift in point of view and how it affects us as readers. All right, so that's all I have for you today. I have to give some credit here. A lot of this came from the Vanderbilt University Teaching Center, and also I got some of my information from Region 10, both great sources. So if you still have questions about this, of course, you can come to me and I'll be happy to look through it with you. Or you can go to any of these two sites. They're both great resources for you and can offer you a lot more examples and information on the topic. Thank you. Y'all have a great day.